All right, let's get this started. How's it going, Steve? How you doing?
All right. Can you hear me, Pablo?
Yeah, I can hear you great. How you doing?
Oh, outstanding. It's amazing. We got this to work. Great.
Yeah. So, thanks for joining us. I know this is your first time on a Twitter Space, so honored to host you for the first time here. And so I thought we'd just jump straight into it. And for those that don't know, Intuitive Machines is really on the forefront of lunar exploration, and we're super lucky to have Steve with us here today. So, Steve, I guess I'll hand it off to you just to give us a brief overview about what Intuitive Machines is, what you guys are doing, and your place in sort of this new lunar ecosystem that's being created.
Well, thanks, Pablo. I appreciate talking to everybody this evening. I'm Steve Altemus, the president and CEO of Intuitive Machines. We're recently a public company traded under the call sign Lunar, L-U-N-R. The head of the NASDAQ said that was the coolest call sign he's ever heard. We went public in February after about close to 10 years in business, and we began as a think tank serving aerospace, energy, and healthcare based in Houston here. And then in 2018, the United States came up with a strategic initiative to return humans to the moon in a sustainable way. And they did that with an offering that was put out by NASA as a civil space agency to allow commercial companies in the United States to build the necessary infrastructure to land softly on the moon and bring NASA payloads, scientific payloads, and engineering payloads to the surface and return that data back to NASA. And so as a result, we bid into that contract. It's called the CLPS contract, Commercial Lunar Payload Service contract. And we're able, as a commercial company, to build an entire lunar program from launch to landing, including all the communication network that's required to communicate with the lander on its way to the moon and return the data back from the moon back to Earth and return that data to the principal investigators for in the science community. So we won the overarching contract, and then we won 3 missions to the moon, which are packages of payloads that NASA offered. And then we bid on those, and were selected 3 times. So we have the first ever mission to return the United States to the moon in 50 years coming up on November 16th of this year. And we have 2 follow-on missions next year in 2024. The first mission will go to the South Pole of the moon as a precursor to humans being on the moon. So it's quite exciting that we have an opportunity to fly to the moon. We've built a control center. We built a lunar lander. We call it Odysseus. Basically, Nova C is the initial nomenclature. We give it a nickname, Odie, and it'll fly on a Falcon 9 booster and land softly on the South Pole of the moon. The region, much like the region of Antarctica, is not all the South Pole, but it's in a general region to begin with. So that's pretty exciting. The opportunity to talk to you guys this evening is really predicated on the fact that we have the complete infrastructure that we've built out to actually conduct missions to the moon. And then our subsequent missions in 2024 will actually land again on the South Pole, drill for water ice to try to detect water ice near the South Pole, near Shackleton Crater. And then the other thing we'll do is we have a micronova, or a hopper. That's a rocket-propelled drone that will fly off of the side of the lander and land and hop into a permanently shadowed crater. We'll also test 4G cellular technology with Nokia to see how far away from the lander we can get that cellular signal to work. We also have a rover that will rove off the surface, around the surface, and we'll also test that Nokia LTE signal. So very exciting missions there. The third mission will be later in the year, and that 2024, and that'll be at a mid-latitude, and we'll be working to study a magnetic anomaly and do some swarm mobility exercises with JPL rovers. So quite exciting times, and what we've emerged as is a company that is set up to do an annual cadence of flights to the moon And in doing so, we can carry a group of NASA payloads, but because it's our infrastructure, Intuitive Machines, we also host commercial payloads to the moon. And that's kind of where we're at. That's how we got started. And we're just building out the commercial infrastructure within cislunar space, in the vicinity of the moon, in orbit around the moon, and on the surface of the moon. So I see what we'll do is we're going to first land softly and successfully on the South Pole. Once you do that, you set up like an expeditionary force. You set up immediately communications, which we did with a ground network around the world of large radio astronomy dishes that then will communicate line of sight to the moon. And then in the second and third missions, we'll put up data relay satellites and begin a navigation and communications constellation around the moon. So we're well on our way of establishing truly the first commercial infrastructure that opens up commercialization of cislunar space. So it's really exciting times, Pablo.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to dive into there. That is like extremely exciting, and I mean, I think it like, to me, you're making like childhood dreams possible, and yeah, I'm just like what. I guess how did Intuitive Machines get started? Could you start us there through kind of like what were the steps that you took in order to build towards where you guys are today?
Yeah, it was kind of serendipitous. I served for NASA human spaceflight for 25 years, and then I got the itch to inside. It was essentially sensed I was an entrepreneur, and retired early from NASA and formed Intuitive Machines. But while I was in NASA, it's kind of funny, in a bureaucracy where I learned how to spell entrepreneurship, came up with an idea to fly a liquid oxygen, liquid methane lunar lander and put a walking robot on the moon in 1,000 days. So an incredibly difficult challenge with an incredibly tight timeline and essentially zero budget. Well, that was called Project M. And Project M turned into Project Morpheus, which was the lander, the liquid oxygen, liquid methane lander that we developed. And we flew 37 times for test flights here on Earth to lift off from the Earth, fly to a simulated landing site on the moon that was at Kennedy Space Center, descend, with all the complications of navigating to a specific site, with dust plumes obscuring our navigation sensors, and touch down softly. So we built that out. We flew it a number of times over a period of about 3 years. We actually did put a walking robot up on International Space Station. And out of that was never a program of record. That was never an official anointed program by NASA. But it said that if you put your mind to it and you can imagine something into existence, was the beginning of my journey as entrepreneurship. So in 2013, I left the agency. I was the deputy center director of Johnson Space Center, and previously for nearly a decade was the head of engineering for human spaceflight at Johnson Space Center. And so had a lot of the understanding of the engineering and the engineering principles and systems that were needed to do something and solve intractable problems with engineering methods and processes. And I knew a lot of the talent and what good talent looked like. And so was able to pull a number of very talented subject matter experts across from the space industry here in Houston. And that became the core of Intuitive Machines and gave us kind of the capability as a core engineering team to really engineer these complex systems. But also that career at NASA gave not only me but the balance of the team, instilled in us the idea that you can think big, that you're supposed to be thinking about how do you move humans off the planet into the solar system. Those were our thoughts every day. That's what we came to work to do. That's what we engineered systems for. And so in forming a company like Intuitive Machines, why not be big? You go big, you dream big, and you set your sights to achieve something that can change history. And I think in November, when you see small commercial company like Intuitive Machines do only what sovereign nations could do, I think it's going to change history and change the world. And so I think it'll be a new paradigm where it's not the purview of sovereign nations. It's not Cold War politics. It's a blend of governments, international partners, and commercial companies that make colonization or commercialization of space possible.
Yeah, totally. So at MoonDAO, we're really focused on lunar settlement long term, and I think you spelled it out, and you're laying a lot of the foundation for making that possible. But I'd love to hear your vision for what these early lunar settlements look like, and what are maybe some of the technological solutions that need to be in place on the surface of the moon to make that possible. I'm talking like years on a lunar base. Do you think that is within our reach in our lifetime, in this decade? What is your time scale for that sort of thing?
I'll address the time scale in a little bit, but I think we have most of the technologies available today to put together the integrated systems we need to allow for habitation on the moon, with the exception of a couple of things. So one, I talked about it. How do you begin a settlement? And that's like you send first an expeditionary force, like a Lewis and Clark kind of force, versus a wagon train full of logistics headed west. It's kind of that analogous to opening up the United States and how we opened up the West. But you land softly, establish communication, and you establish navigation infrastructure so that you can then begin to not just worry about the landing problem. You can now worrying about the exploration problem of where are you going to settle, how are you going to get the data to learn where to settle, how are you going to start to bring up heavier and heavier cargo that supports habitation for humans, how are you going to build the human systems that have to be delivered before the humans get there. And then once the humans touch down initially, that'll begin slowly, where there'll be two astronauts that'll go to the surface potentially in the Artemis program. They'll do sorties to the surface with short duration stays, and then they'll come back off the surface and maybe go to the gateway and then come home via the Orion capsule. And those then you'll have to start to build the infrastructure like a habitat that has the resources to be able to sustain humans for longer periods of time. And that's really the life support systems and the consumables, water, oxygen, you can imagine that, those kinds of things. And then you'll have to have alongside, you've already started growing your cargo or logistics supply chain to the moon. So you can bring those systems up there. A couple of things that we'll need in order to get there are some technology breakthroughs. So we don't have a GPS constellation around the moon, and we want to be able to provide a service to the rest of the world and to governments and commercial companies, whoever want to go to the moon, to be able to navigate with precision on the surface. You'll need prospecting data. You'll need data about the surface of the moon, not only where the rich minerals or the rich metals or the rich materials are that warrant having humans on the surface, but you also need contour maps and understand really what good landing sites are. So prospecting missions are key that inform where you're going to live and work for the long term. I think what we're struggling with here in the United States is really about survive the night technology for the ability to survive the cold of the lunar night and to even operate during the lunar night, because a lunar day is 14 days. The temperature drops to probably close to minus 280 Fahrenheit as soon as the terminator comes across and you see the dark, unlit portion of the moon. That gets very, very cold. And so typically batteries and computers and cameras and all of those electronics things freeze to death and won't come back to life. So how do you, in a mass efficient way, launch systems and integrate systems to allow us to survive and thrive and operate during a lunar night? Most solutions today are nuclear materials, and those are very difficult to fly off the launch pad through the atmosphere in terms of regulatory environment. So That's not really open yet to the commercial sector, but I think that's something that has to be dealt with, frankly. And that's a technology, but it's fairly well understood, and it just needs to be turned into an integrated system. And I think other things like I talked about the navigation constellation, and survive the night. And then you'll have to deal with just the amount of mass reduction you're going to need to be able to fly efficiently and cost effectively heavier and heavier cargos. We can't put all our money in the space launch system, at $2+ billion per launch. That is cost prohibitive for a settlement. And so driving the cost of heavy lift down, you see SpaceX Starship trying to do that with a ferocious attack on driving those costs down. And so we hope that's successful, because that's a gateway. That's something that needs to happen to allow us to be able to afford, as not only a country, but as a collaboration of multi-international partners, to be able to afford sustained presence on the moon. And I think that, more than a technology breakthrough, is what's going to be required. We're going to need economic breakthroughs to drive the costs down. And that's why it's so appropriate to have a conversation this evening with MoonDAO and talk about, fractionalized funding of systems and democratization of space, so that there's more people playing in this game, more people interested in moving us in that direction of a settlement on the moon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear your vision for how this crypto tooling, this Web3 tooling, could play a role in space exploration. Because I know this is something that you've thought about for a while, and when we got in contact, it felt like this was something that you had really been tinkering around with in your head for a bit. So I'd love to hear sort of your vision or thoughts about how the crypto economy can support what you guys are doing, or help make the space economy more accessible, potentially.
Yeah, that I am passionate about it. I am passionate about democratizing space, where more of everyday life is all about thinking about off planet. And today we benefit from even now we're benefiting from the services that are orbiting the Earth, in terms of communications, broadband communications, in terms of telecommunications, traditional telecommunications, in terms of Earth imagery. All of those kinds of things affect our everyday life. GPS, great example. But typically those are government run, and then slowly over time commercialized to become big business. So big companies, aerospace companies, communications companies get to play in that environment, but not many people think about that day to day. So how might we get more people involved? There's not enough engineering talent. There's not enough aerospace engineers in the world. And if this can't be the purview of only engineers and scientists, this should be the purview of everyone on Earth to embrace space exploration. And so how might we do that? And how might we allow more people to participate? And it could be I like the fractionalized funding model that now sets control for what goes on in space and takes it out of the purview of governments and puts it in the hands of people that can choose where they want to go. Do they want to study the icy moons of Jupiter? Do they want to go and do lunar material return? Do they want to build out infrastructure around Mars to support Mars exploration? We need a group of people to want to contribute to that, contribute technologies to that, contribute dollars to that, participate in that, so that there's more of more stakeholders on Earth. And so that's why I like a DAO structure that allows self-governance, and then allows us to use a new economic model or a new economic engine in fractionalized funding to pay for some of these ideas. Here's an example. The National Science Foundation runs what NASA calls the decadal survey, which is the science that should be done and is prioritized to say, here over the next 10 years, NASA, you must, if you're going to do, say, planetary science or heliophysics or whatever, these are the primary science objectives that you must accomplish in the next 10 years or strive to accomplish. Well, that's the National Science Foundation setting that tone. And in some sense, other things are more important or as important, but don't get a priority because they're not officially blessed by a government agency like the National Science Foundation or NASA or the National Space Council, and they're not authorized or appropriated through Congress. And so how might we create other types of missions, develop other types of technologies and instruments to support space exploration and create that sense of wonder in everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is just so much inherent interest in space. People from all over the world, you could ask any child anywhere. And I think that the number one job that people want around the world is to be an astronaut someday. And I think that there's so many people that want to get involved one way or another, either through funding and making it possible, or even just getting into the conversation. And you mentioned something really interesting there, which is how NASA and the NSF and these other big institutions set the tone on sort of what are the research areas. I'm curious, if you had, say, unlimited funding, or to research a particular question that might not be currently in scope of these bigger institutions, where would you direct that funding? What do you think are sort of these problems that aren't receiving enough attention right now?
Well, it's pretty interesting. There's I really love the Voyager spacecraft, which we built and let fly out into the solar system and then outside the solar system, and they're still working and still functioning and sending data back. And they are so far away. New Horizons is another spacecraft that flew out by Pluto and is now departing the solar system, and they want to maybe shut down funding to that. Why? I mean, let's just continue to be curious and explore. So I've always liked personally sending probes as far out into the solar system and into the universe beyond as a priority, as something that just is so interesting to me. Just to be able to say that it's lived for 30 or 40 years and is billions and billions of years or miles away from us. That's just incredible. I don't know about science itself necessarily in terms of what I would prioritize. What I would do is I would allow for businesses to participate more and more and more in building, developing, building, testing, and operating the infrastructure in space. So the infrastructure around the moon, like I talked about, to drop satellites off in space exploration type orbits or highly sophisticated orbits, to put things in lunar orbit, to put infrastructure in and around Mars orbit. We don't have to do everything, and neither does the government. So the government's purview might be in landing astronauts on the moon or landing rovers on the surface of Mars. That's kind of how planetary science works, and that's kind of how human spaceflight works. Well, commercial businesses can and should grow to build the infrastructure necessary to support those. And the governments ought to lean on them to do that. Like this communication network, we don't have today a lunar distance network, a network from ground terminals that can communicate directly to the moon. We have the deep space network, and then we have a network that supports geosynchronous orbit and low Earth orbit. So the deep space network is consumed with studying James Webb, bringing that data down, bringing the Mars rover data down, etc. So let the commercial companies build out the global lunar distance network, put the data relay satellites up, create the navigation scheme. That's really good business and really good model. because what that does is it allows us to do it cheaper and faster and keep our competitive edge as commercial businesses, keeps us growing and moving faster in space exploration. One last point on that is, the government-funded programs for human spaceflight take decades. We cannot move at that pace. And so primarily, other than what missions would we do, I want to change the economics of space exploration so we can go faster and further and put more systems out there. That's what's needed, as opposed to the way we kind of do it today, which are 15-year programs, 20-year programs that cost billions and end up eventually canceled because there wasn't sustained appetite in the House and Senate to continue to fund these programs. And that sets us back. So we feel like we're redoing what we've done 50 years ago. And that can't be. We owe it to our next generation to move faster and more efficiently.
Absolutely. That's something that I ask myself a lot is you look throughout history at some of these big projects, these big infrastructure projects that the United States was able to achieve, and the deadline, the timelines that they were able to achieve it on. And it is just mind-boggling compared to the pace that we're at today. And I want to throw that question back over to you. What do you think is the thing slowing down our expectations or timelines on this? Like, do you think it's just it's bureaucracy? Do you think that if you could wave a magic wand, or maybe try to diagnose it as if you were a doctor? Why do you think that we've kind of slowed down our speed on a lot of these issues?
Well, I think one of the reasons we sent Apollo within a decade to put a man on the moon, that was a national imperative, and the full force and will of the United States was put against succeeding with Apollo and doing that. The geopolitical forces at work was a Cold War with the Soviet Union. So taking advantage of the Cold War tensions, the United States created a sense of security issue that put the full force and will of the government towards landing a person on the moon in a decade. That national imperative is kind of weakened considerably. The Cold War has been softened. And now we get into, let's continue to do space exploration at the pace at which our commitments to fund it go. And so as there are competing priorities within our legislature and other competing priorities around the world, we can't go as fast. And then you look at, okay, well, how do you buy programs or acquire programs as a result of those competing priorities? Is you set them up to bridge through not only one administration, but a second and a third, maybe a fourth. And so all of that incentivizes those programs and those contractors working those programs and those contracts that are set up to continue to keep that program sold, instead of you have an achievement, you have a milestone, and you've got to meet it, and then the program may be over. But accomplish it and then end. And that's what I like about the CLIPS program. It's fixed price. How do you get to the moon for less than $100 million, say, in less than the time it takes you to get an undergraduate degree, 4 years. Now then it's done. That mission, that contract is done. Then, so that sets you up with a mindset within a commercial company like Intuitive Machines to be mission focused, to be cost efficient, and to achieve the technical challenge you've been given. And those things are quite motivational. I think today there's a lot of geopolitical forces going around that are creating an imperative, whether we think about it as a national security imperative or we think about it as just competition with other sovereign nations. That imperative, that competition is healthy because it forces us to look internally and say, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to remain competitive? How are we going to do that? And I think commercial sector business is inherently competitive and is a good thing, and it shouldn't be an entitlement. So there's just some random thoughts about kind of about how it came about and how we think about things, how we acquire goods. That might be answering your question about affecting the pace of delivery.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think about this a lot in terms of like, capitalism is sort of this collaborative competition where we've agreed on some set of rules, and then we let the free market kind of duke it out, and see who can achieve it first. And I particularly really like the X Prize and how that was set up, where it was like, hey, here's this big, grand goal. Here's money for it, and then whoever does it first, gets some chunk of it. But I wonder, do you think something like that is sustainable, or could maybe help drive this forward? Are there other economic models that you think maybe go beyond, clips? I'm curious what you think about in those areas.
Yeah, I think that X Prize and clips are kind of similarly, similar in a way. What I think is needed is, with respect to the X Prize, is transparency within. There wasn't enough transparency within how that was going on, in my opinion. But the NASA model is a shared risk model that says NASA will share the risk. NASA will pay up front partially for your mission to help you get started and keep going, to give you some investment in that program. You have to finish it to get paid fully, but we'll share that risk. We'll share the risk in the technology challenge, in the schedule, and in the cost. And that gives you just enough, not to close the business, but enough to get some infrastructure in place so that you can start to sell commercial business and be sustainable. Because commercial business that's not sustainable will die on the vine, right? So I think the way to go in the future are with models like that, like you speak about, but that have a business case in the end that can be sustainable. So one, for example, would be, say we collaborated on a project that put a lunar prospector where a high-tech instrument or hyperspectral imager or some other kind of imager we put on a satellite bus and we put it up around the moon. And then that data set that was collected with that prospector had to be built, that instrument had to be built, it had to be launched to the moon, it has to be operated around the moon. But there's a rich data set of what is going on at the moon in terms of where the resources are, how those people can dream then using that data set about how those resources can be used and monetized. So that data set becomes valuable, much like Earth observation imagery. So if that data set is valuable, then those who invested in that project can see a return, and that becomes sustainable. And so I would love projects like that to come out of the discussion that we're having tonight, where we can brainstorm about those kinds of things that we can invest in that become, and invest not only dollars, but technologies, communications technologies or encryption technologies or navigation schemes or observation instruments. All of those kinds of things have a return when you bring that data back or you offer that data as a service.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to bring it back to like space exploration and where you see this going, long term. So I'm thinking, 100, 200, 300 years into the future. What do you think we're doing on the lunar surface, and how do you think, are you a Mars guy? Are you what drives you, I guess, in sort of like, because you mentioned at the beginning of this talk, kind of like making your impact, dreaming big. What is the biggest dream that you think we should move towards as a civilization? We're becoming multiplanetary.
I think it might not be you said 100 years, right, or so. It might not be the settlements on the moon harvesting or mining on the moon, or even the scientific water discovery and settlements on Mars. I think it's in solving the transportation challenge. How do we move in space light years within our lifetimes? And, we're pink fleshy things as human beings that are susceptible to radiation. And so we are, no matter how far we think we can go with our current propulsion technologies and putting humans in capsules, trying to protect them with radiation, we're still in baby steps in terms of exploration. So what's most intriguing to me are the ideas of, impulse drives, warp drives, wormholes, those kinds of things that then transform the understanding of physics into real engineered systems that allow us to move further in our lifetimes than we ever dreamt possible. And I love that kind of research, and I love that work that's going on. There's not enough of it going on. So those experiments would be quite interesting. Imagine what that would open up. Where, we did at NASA, we did a design reference mission, DRM-5 or DRA, the Design Reference Architecture 5 for Mars. That was, transit time. That was a 5-year mission to put human boots on Mars and then return them. Took 5 years for one mission. That mission will never fly. And it's always 30 plus years away because we're limited by chemical propulsion. We're limited by the radiation effects on human beings. We're limited on the life support systems that we have to take out there. And we're limited on just the timing of where the planets are with respect to each other and the trajectories we can fly between Earth and Mars. And so that's with our traditional thinking in terms of chemical and electric propulsion. We've got to find alternatives if we're really going to be a spacefaring planet.
Is there anything in particular there that you find compelling in terms of alternative propulsion, or any kind of inklings of interesting technology that could help us get there? If you were, say, a young researcher right now, just starting to do their PhD, and you want to make an impact in that area, what would your recommendation be for them?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I've seen some really interesting research on that kind of. If you jump to it, it's it results in warp drives or impulse drives, and that's really accelerating the quantum vacuum and allowing the energy within a vacuum to create propulsion. That's really a far out kind of way, and there's people doing research in that area that's quite intriguing and has some promise. It's still a long way away, but you mentioned 100 plus years, so that's why I hope what we should do is look to the science fiction writers, because generally what they do is they inform. They're the leading visionaries, and you look at how science fiction has come true over history of time. We look to them for those ideas, and then a curious scientist or engineer will go figure out how to make the system they dream about. I really like that idea. We put a walking robot on the International Space Station when I was the engineering director at NASA, and I didn't realize what I'd done until I'd gone back and somebody told me that Isaac Asimov had written a book about that, where there was a space station going around the Earth with a robot on board looking back at Earth. And I thought I didn't know anything about that at the time we did it. And then we did it. And then I read the book. That was incredible. So I think look to the sci-fi writers and look to the really basic research that's going on in physics and quantum theory. And I think there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reading Dune right now, and I'm wondering, where are the ornithopters? Why don't we have these things? But yeah, I'm curious, if you put any weight on some of the sort of anomalous observations with the UAPs that are going on right now, because they seem to be demonstrating some sort of alternate propulsion. Do you think that do do you put any weight on those observations? Like, are you following any of that at all? I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
No, I don't really have any thoughts in that area right now. I'd be making it up if I did. So, yeah, I haven't given that much thought recently. Kind of been busy with focusing on the moon, Pablo, and trying to get us there here in the short term. I think we're like 75 days away, which is just incredible.
That's amazing. Yeah. Or what are your thoughts at this point? I mean, I imagine you must be incredibly excited. Is there any nervousness there, or like, I guess maybe walk us through what it took to get to this point. I imagine a ton of testing, but you said that it was a 4-year program, so you were able to pull this off in a pretty short time frame. What was that experience like?
Well, I think, if you think about, we were talking about the time for what it takes to develop space systems and how we have to be faster and better than we have been in order to maintain a competitive advantage between ourselves and just to be able to push the boundaries in space exploration. What I really liked about the experience that we've just gone through, and certainly there is some anxiety because I'll give you a reason. There's roughly in all the missions ever conducted by anyone on Earth to the moon, only 40% have been successful. 60% of all missions, including all the successful Apollo missions, 40% have been successful. Those are not great odds. So we've done a tremendous amount of innovation, development work, testing work to increase our odds up towards the 75% range. Who knows? But what we've done is we've taken the intractable problem of landing softly on the moon, which you've seen a number of failures, and I talked about the stats. You take an over-constrained budget and an over-constrained schedule, and you know what? You can't do it like everybody else did it and be successful because you'll fail. So what those 3 things did was force innovative thinking. It forced inventions. It forced us to look at the problem differently and approach it with, that's not going to work, that's too heavy, that takes too long, that costs too much, and then turn that around and say, well, how are we going to do it then? And that, to me, has been the most fun, but it's been the hardest part of this. But it falls out of our company naturally because we're given this intractable challenge. And so it's kind of forced innovation. We don't have innovation officers in the company. We don't do anything like that. We have problems we have to solve, and we solve those problems. So that's been really exciting. Leading up to shipping to the Cape and launching is a very exciting time. We're all so proud. Everybody's put their heart and soul into it. We've done the best we can do within the constraints we've had, and we're going to give it a shot. And certainly that creates some anxiety, but that's what we do, right? As rocket scientists, that's what you do. You put it all on the line and you go for it, and you aim for high achievement. And it's better to have tried and failed, if that turns out to be the case, than to never have attempted at all. So my favorite quote in the world is the Teddy Roosevelt quote in The Man in the Arena that talks about the sweat and the toil and then stepping into the ring and making an attempt and putting it on the line. So that's living, that's being alive. So that's kind of how it feels right now. We are going to be successful. We didn't set up to just have one mission to the moon and succeed or fail, and then if we don't succeed, we go away and wither and die. As a company, we set up where we have an annual cadence of missions. We have diverse business in different areas. All of those help to feed the business going forward and make us resilient to failures. In aerospace industry, in space exploration, there are always failures everywhere. And you have to be able to incorporate them into your business model. You have to incorporate them into your thought process. You have to mitigate them to the greatest extent. And then you've got to, at some point, go for it. And it's time to go for it. And you can just feel the energy in everybody building up in anticipation of this mission. We're over here. I tried to get in mission control. I didn't know if we were doing a video today or not. but I wanted to do this call from our Mission Control Center here in Houston. But we're actually commanding the payloads that are on the lunar lander over at our production facility about 5 miles away from here, from our Mission Control Center here in Houston, and watching the data and passing that data to people all over the country in their payload operations centers. All that's happening, from our lander to Mission Control to the payload operations centers. It's quite exciting. I think the furthest we've been here was a payload earlier this week, where we passed the data all the way over to Geneva, payload data. So that just shows that we're getting real close.
Yeah, no, I mean, it must feel, I mean, I can't even imagine what it feels like. Yeah, I mean, no matter what, I think that, you are kind of carrying the baton of, American innovation, and all of us here at MoonDAO, and I guess and any space lover, is rooting for you guys to succeed. So, I really, I wonder if you guys can you feel that sort of weight behind you of like the U.S. and kind of just all of these people that want to support what you're doing. How can we, I guess at this stage, support your work? What is the most useful thing that an everyday person can do to get involved and support what you guys are doing?
Well, I really do appreciate the followership and increasing the awareness of what we're doing. We're doing something not only for the United States, we're doing it for all of humanity, right? To trying to break the paradigm and show a different way of doing things and do it with integrity, credibility, and giving it everything we've got. And so I want to put some heat and light on it. It's one of the reasons we went public as a company, so that more people could see that it's okay to aim high. It's okay to put everything on the line. It's okay to step up into the ring and give it your best, knowing there's a possibility of failure. So increasing awareness of what we're trying to do. Generally, the support has been phenomenal from everybody rooting for us. All of my great friends at NASA, when I worked there for 25 years, are all rooting for our success as a company. I just want more people to follow us, to be engaged. And what I'd really like to do in the long run is create a project with the MoonDAO where we can do something together. I love the charter that you guys have put together. I love the idea of it, the economic model of it, the innovative approach towards, inventing different things that could possibly help, technologies that could possibly help us with sustained human presence. So with the capability of this company and others to fly to the moon and us to fly on a regular cadence of missions, how might we work together to find opportunities to open up this experience to others? You talked about competitions for, technology breakthroughs that we could potentially fly to the moon. There's some ability. I talked about prospecting and putting maybe a MoonDAO funded instrument on a prospector that will help create rich data set for the moon, which is really only has one lunar reconnaissance orbiter going around and around and around taking pictures at a certain very low resolution. We need much higher resolution and feature recognition mapping on the surface. There's lots of those projects. And there's big projects too, like conducting an entire space exploration mission, or deploying a constellation of satellites with a certain communications protocol within them. Those are all very exciting. And so I'd ask for you guys, how might you go off from this talk today and brainstorm some ideas and projects that we could do together to start to expose to the rest of the world how this can work as an economic model, be over and above the way we've traditionally been doing things with the government and with cost plus award fee contracts and big aerospace. This is an opportunity to kind of mix it up and change that paradigm. That's what I'd really like to continue our discussion about going forward.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're almost here at the hour mark. I wanted to also ask, how do we? I mean, I guess you went into it a little bit, but I guess following Intuitive Machines, I recommend everyone here in this space to tap on the Intuitive Machines bubble and give them a follow. And how is there a newsletter? How do we all kind of get the latest on what's going on with Intuitive Machines?
I think Twitter is a great platform. You look at our website, www.intuitivemachines.com. We're putting up updates all the time. We're putting out press releases all the time. Josh Marshall's our communications director. He does a fantastic job of trying to get our word out there. We have an interesting thing on the Intuitive Machines website, I believe, called the Faces of Intuitive Machines. And I'd encourage you to look at that and just to hear from the stories of the employees. And they're just short 2-minute videos that talk about, how everyone fell in love with space and what their aspirations are and why they came to work here. And it kind of gives you a real sense of the culture it's made up of all of these people who have this deep passion for space and are mission driven and want to accomplish and achieve things in space, and just why they came to the company and why they have this passion. So that's a good read to get a sense of us, and we'll keep talking, Pablo, between you and your folks to kind of think through how do we work together and how do we leverage the ability for us to land on the moon and fly things to the moon and put things in orbit. How do we help the MoonDAO achieve its mission, and how does MoonDAO help Intuitive Machines? And I think there's a strategic partnership here that we should start to exercise.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and let's definitely follow up with ways that we can work together. I agree that there's a lot of not to use a business word here, but synergies between your company and MoonDAO, the organization, and I feel like there's a lot of awesome work that we can do together. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for listening. I enjoyed talking and appreciate the questions. So ad lunam, to the moon.
To the moon. Bye, everyone.